Operation Restore Hope, in my view, is one of the more important operations for the United States Army because it represents a new kind of mission for the Army. Clearly, the conditions in Somalia were as dismal as I've ever seen them. It was a very different environment than even you would have found it in the desert with respect to Desert Storm.
In early December 1992, the 7th Transportation Group was alerted for possible deployment in support of Operation Restore Hope, the multinational relief effort for Somalia. By mid-December, elements of the 10th Transportation Battalion were already en route to Hythe, England, and Diego Garcia to prepare pre-positioned Army vessels for use during the operation in Somalia. Several days later, a surge team deployed directly to the port of Mogadishu to coordinate the lateral flow of personnel and equipment that would support the humanitarian effort. The 870th Transportation Company undertook the arrival and departure airfield control group mission at the Mogadishu International Airport, taking over from the Marines who had arrived in the early days of the operation. The 119th Transportation Company was tasked to begin receiving cargo at the port of Mogadishu. Starting on Christmas Day and continuing steadily until the first week of January, over 1,000 soldiers were deployed from the group via Langley Air Force Base. This included the headquarters and headquarters company of the 7th Transportation Group, along with elements from all 4 of the group's battalions. Upon their arrival, they found a country which lacked even the basic life support infrastructure. There was no electrical service, no running water, no telephone system, and to further complicate matters, no established government. Because most of the command structure was scattered throughout the city, getting back and forth between the different headquarters was an operation in itself. Vehicles always moved in pairs throughout the crowded city streets. Perhaps the most dangerous area was the main marketplace in Mogadishu. Guards had to be on constant alert to keep the locals from climbing on stopped vehicles. When the 1st Marine and 7th Group units arrived at the port of Mogadishu, they found warehouses full of trash and animal carcasses. The debris would have to be cleaned up so to provide shelter for the thousands of Army, Marine, and Navy personnel that would occupy the port during the operation.
It kind of sickened me to see how poor people actually do live in other countries. I know that they live just as bad in some cases in the United States, but I'd never seen it firsthand, and it really shocked me to see how bad things can really get.
Security became an issue as many of the displaced Somalis were using the port as a shelter. Even as the American forces began operations, hundreds of local nationals were roaming around the port, some living in the cargo containers that were placed 2 and 3 high as barriers. Gangs of Somali youths would stand in the containers and throw rocks at the military personnel below. There were numerous attempts to disrupt operations on the port. In one instance, several Somalis set fire to a container full of roofing tar. As firefighters from the 10th Mountain Division fought the blaze, youths pelted the firemen with rocks and other objects from the hillside above. It had become clear that the port had a dual purpose: an area of military operations and eventually as a place of commerce. This required a huge effort using the 7th Transportation Group, Marine, and Navy CB assets, as well as Somali nationals. During the Civil War, the warlords had removed almost all wiring in the country, selling it as scrap to fund their reign of terror. This left the port without an electrical distribution system. In order to maintain the necessary 24-hour-a-day operations, permanent lighting would have to be reinstalled on the piers, in the parking areas, and in the buildings.
As the Port Authority, I felt very, very good about the progress that we made. We cleared 100,000 square feet of space on the port. We rebuilt the port infrastructure to a significant degree, working with contractors and also Somali labor. We rebuilt walls, we put back in electrical systems, we put back in windows, and we helped people get back on their feet in terms of restarting their businesses.
As all of this was going on, it was still business as usual for the group. Ships and aircraft had to be unloaded, cargo had to be transported, and support services had to be performed to assist in these important missions.
A lot of the ships that came in from other nations were not self-sustaining ships, and because of our equipment, we were able to offload those ships that otherwise would have taken, in some cases, weeks to download.
The 119th Transportation Company accomplished most of the stevedore operations at the port. This day and night operation went unabated during the deployment and redeployment phases.
The group mission was an important one. We were sent there to receive military forces, not just the United States forces, but also coalition forces from a wide range of different nations, from the French to the Italians to the Canadians to the Australians to the Pakistanis and a whole range of other nations, Nigerians, everybody that contributed from the United Nations standpoint, we were able to receive there at the Port of Mogadishu. And with our equipment and people and the expertise that we had, we're probably the only country that could have gone in there and set up operations and being able to do all the things we did.
The port was bottlenecked. The entire country depends on the port. The port was shut down, and opening the port, getting the humanitarian aid moving out to the countryside, I think that's probably the biggest accomplishment I think we've been able to do.
Working under hot, dusty, and sometimes rainy conditions, the 7th Group stevedores moved the cargo on and off the ships at a record pace, all the while maintaining safety and cargo accountability.
Safety is a big thing as part of being a stevedore, because accidents can happen all too frequently. We try to cut down on them. We deal with a lot of big cargo, so it's good to be safe.
Now we've been able to move more ships in and out of the harbor, keep them in the harbor in less time than anybody ever dreamed possible. Our high water mark is about 12 ship moves in one 24-hour period. In a little harbor like this, unprotected, open roadstead, that's probably, well, that's about a miracle, I would think.
The Port of Mogadishu is not Bremerhaven. It's not Bayonne, New Jersey. It's not anything like you've seen. It's an unprotected port in the middle of the Indian Ocean. Very austere, and without the 7th Transportation Group of equipment and people, we wouldn't be able to move all the coalition forces and the United Nations contingent into theater, into the country. So the 7th Transportation Group did what we do so often, and that is to open ports and open possibilities.
Also, due to the arid and unsanitary conditions in Somalia, potable water had to be either imported or reclaimed from seawater. 2 reverse osmosis water purification units, or ROPU, were located at the port to provide water for showers and for washing vehicles. The majority of water for drinking was shipped in 1.5 liter plastic bottles packed in lightweight cardboard cases. This presented quite a few problems. The cases were improperly stowed aboard the ship. Several shipments of water were damaged by leaking bottles and from cases which had become saturated from rain and seawater. Without the cartons holding the bottles together, much of the shipment ended up loose in the holds of the ship and had to be unloaded by hand. On one occasion, the entire command and staff of the group worked through the night unloading the thousands of loose bottles. The need for water and pier space was that great. Army watercraft were pressed into service to shuttle equipment and supplies from Mogadishu to the southern Somali port of Kismayu and to the coastal Kenyan port city of Mombasa. A provisional unit, the 710th Boat Company, was situated at the port of Kismayu and provided the necessary support for 2 landing craft utility vessels that ferried equipment up and down the East African coastline. Some of that cargo was engineer equipment of the 10th Mountain Division that was used to construct a bridge and rebuild roads in and around Kismayu. Equipment that was pre-positioned in Diego Garcia aboard lash barges was discharged at the Mombasa port and transferred to the LCUs using the 7th Group's floating barge derrick crane. The Mombasa harbor was used because of more calm waters than that of the more northern ports. The U.S. Army Diving Detachment played a key role in removing sunken Soviet patrol boats from the Kismayu harbor. The vessels were raised to the surface and then floated to another part of the harbor where they could be out of the way. The Army divers also assisted the 24th Transportation Battalion in an attempt to raise a Somali tugboat that was sunk at the Mogadishu port, blocking valuable pier space. The 100 Transportation Company was tasked with moving cargo from both the Mogadishu airfield and the port to various parts of Somalia. During the operation, they operated a logistics highway, sustaining units with necessary supplies. Probably the most unusual cargo transported during the operation were surrendered Somali technical vehicles. The vehicles were surrendered to the U.S. military by local Somali warlords. Although none of the vehicles were in operational condition, it was hoped that by cannibalizing parts, at least several vehicles could eventually be pressed into service by the Mogadishu City Police Department. The vehicles, which were located in northern Mogadishu, had to be loaded onto flatbed trailers using forklifts and then transported down a sandy, hilly, desert road back to Mogadishu. As the security phase of the operation became a reality, it was time to begin phase 2, making the port of Mogadishu not only a place of military operations, but one of commerce and industry.
Probably one of the most satisfying things to me is to see kind of a rebirth of life in many of the Somali people. We had an opportunity to bring people into the port and basically allow them to do what they want to do, and that's work for a living. We had Somali stevedores and equipment operators and electricians, stonemasons, bricklayers, people that did just a tremendous amount of work and craftsmanship in improving the port. We were able to work out methods by which we could bring these people in so that they could have some money to go back and I guess restart life with their families.
Hundreds of cargo containers stacked 4 high in places were initially used as security barriers for the port. The removal of the barriers was the first step in restoring commercialization to the Mogadishu seaport. Along with the containers, hundreds of tons of wrecked machinery and scrap metal had to be removed to make room for staging space and to gain full access to warehouse facilities. This project went unabated day and night for weeks, almost doubling the usable space that was originally available when the 7th Group first set foot on the port back in December. Much of this new space was used as a staging area for unit equipment that was being redeployed. Staging areas on the port constantly filled up and emptied as vehicles and equipment were loaded back onto the ships. This also went on 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
We brought more humanitarian vessels in there, from the World Food Program to Red Cross to CARE to UNICEF and a whole range of other humanitarian relief organizations that allowed the people of Somalia to be fed. And I am proud of the fact that we contributed to cutting off the terrible starvation and suffering that was going on in that country. It was incredible how much we were able to accomplish in just the 3 months that I was there.
Although the time spent in Somalia was difficult, there were a few bright spots. Several celebrities came to visit the 7th group, including TV star Gerald McCraney, actor Charlton Heston, and country singer Clint Black. Also, the Somali National Dance Company and several dozen children from the local orphanage presented a show for the 7th group soldiers. Letters from home also helped to make the time go by quicker. In addition to mail from family and friends, there were also cards, letters, and banners from local businesses and school children. All of this really boosted the morale of the 7th group soldiers there and showed that the community was behind them 100%.
As the 7th Transportation Group Commander, I'm very proud of the contributions we made to support Operation Restore Hope. As of mid-March of this year, when most of us redeployed, there had been over 1,200 soldiers, 1,200 of our group soldiers who had deployed to Somalia in support of that operation. By the time we redeployed in mid-March, the group had already received and discharged over 800 aircraft at the Mogadishu airport and over 110 cargo ships at the seaport. We had also discharged some 7,000 wheeled vehicles, over 2,200 containers, and 80 helicopters, all for the support of the people in Somalia. And the group continues to build on these statistics with over 200 soldiers still serving in Somalia. I think it's safe to say that there is no unit in the United States Army which has the capability and resources to close the force like the 7th Transportation Group. Whether it be in a modern port facility or airfield or in an austere environment like Somalia, we stand ready to execute force projection and meet the requirements of the Army Strategic Mobility Program.
Homecoming. The first 7th group soldiers began the long journey home from Somalia in early March, and the redeployments continued until mid-April. It was a great day for 7th group soldiers and families.
In closing, I would like to thank the communities of Fort Eustis and Fort Story for the support rendered for Operation Restore Hope. Most especially, I would like to thank the soldiers of the 7th Transportation Group, not only the 1,200 soldiers who deployed, but the 3,200 who remained behind to continue operations for the rest of the Forces Command. Clearly, Operation Restore Hope was a total team effort, and we couldn't accomplish it without everybody working together. May God bless you all, and God bless America, always resolute.